Hello everyone, my name is Sydney and today I'm going to take you behind the scenes on a creative portrait session as part of the Art Up Close initiative for Laramie Public Arts Coalition. So let me give you a little context about who I am as a portrait photographer. I love to take a really simple, minimalistic approach to my portraits. I really don't do like high quality, high production images. I like to take a more film-inspired aesthetic, so I really love human quality, imperfection, and I really like to take a collaborative approach. Now what I'm going to cover in this tutorial today is going to be really geared towards photographers, whether you're brand new to the medium or you're super experienced. So I'm going to talk briefly about camera settings. We're going to look at behind the scenes video of the shoot. I'm going to go over some composition, shooting, and posing techniques. I'll also show you all the final images and the settings I shot each image at, and I'll go over a few easy editing tips. So if you're unfamiliar with manual camera settings, I just want to give you some context to help you better understand what goes into composing a shot. So there's 3 settings that you're going to constantly be working with when you're doing a shoot. ISO is going to be how sensitive your camera is to the light. It's expressed in whole numbers, usually starting at about 100, and then it can get up into the thousands depending on the capabilities of your camera. A low ISO is going to be less sensitive to light and have less grain. Higher ISOs will allow more light into the image, but also have higher grain. So the shutter speed is going to be how fast your camera clicks to capture the image, and it's going to be expressed in seconds or fractions of a second. On the shutter, if it's going slow, it will be a blurrier image with more light coming in, but a faster shutter speed will produce a sharper image, but it allows for less time for light to come in. So the last setting is aperture, which might be the most complex setting to understand. Your f-stop is going to tell you how open or closed the eye of your lens is. A lower f-stop number is going to have a more open eye, which will give you more light and a more precise focus on a singular point. A larger f-stop number will have a more closed eye of the lens, which will allow for less light to come in, but more of your image will be in focus. So shooting in manual will take some practice, and it's just going to be a constant dialogue between you, your camera, and the environment to determine where you want to put your settings at to reach an ideal exposure. So this shoot was born of 2 things, the first being a found location, and the second was a response to human items left behind, kind of the world left behind after people. Alright, so let's get into the shoot. Here is the behind the scenes video. So first off, we're picking clothing. So I already have a location picked. I went with a strong black and white color scheme. Also brought along like a mustard green dress to layer in with the warmer tones. So we're getting into the house, and we're going to first shoot in this green room. So I'm having her sit in the corner. Some photographers say that having your model or subject sit first can establish some comfort and kind of relax their shoulders, so I like to start seated as well. Here I'm having her kind of turn inwards and tip her head towards the light, kind of giving her a ragdoll shape. So with this really clunky inward posing with this collared shirt layered under the dress, I get this very childish, girlish dollhouse aesthetic. So here I'm framing her in the window, trying to get a little silhouette kind of popping on the edges of her profile. So now I'm adding some motion into the shot. So I'm shooting at a super slow shutter speed and having her shake out her hair and grab the edges of the dress. And that gives us some motion and some blur, which kind of moves us into a creepier aesthetic, but I really like it. So now I'm having her remove the white undershirt, and we're just gonna have her skin against the black of her dress, the black of her hair, and the black of her boots, which I think gives this really wonderful contrast. So we played around in this pinkish corner with a chair that was already on location. And then I had this idea. I was imagining, kind of a cramped feeling, tight spaces, low ceiling. So I wanted to bring that feeling of being cramped in a dollhouse and also bring in some details of the ceiling. So I'm having her stand up on the chair, cover her face with her hair, and kind of reach up to the ceiling. Again, we're going into a creepier territory, but I really like the aesthetic. So now I'm working with her to kind of tip her legs up on the chair. I think that kind of breaks up the dark tones of her dress and hair, and I really love the way that that looks. And now I'm having her kind of curl up. We're going a bit more soft and childish, getting some curved lines as opposed to those straight lines we were getting with her legs, just to kind of change up the shape. So now I'm shooting a bit wider. I'm stepping further back to get a really long shot, and I really love the way it looks like kind of a diorama, like we're kind of looking into a dollhouse. And then I'm having her sit really forward towards the edge of the chair, kind of pushing her legs in so we get those inward sharp angles, and she is just a very long, tall, beautiful girl. Kind of accentuating her lines with that posing is really pleasing. So now we're pulling in this white sheet as a pseudo backdrop or just some contrast to go with her long line black dress, and then we have this long line of the white sheet, and it gives me a little bit of structure to work with. So now I'm instructing her to pull the sheet over her eyes, and I think this is a really great time to talk about something in photography that we talk about a lot in art, which is, how much visual information do you want to add, or how much visual information do you want to take away from the image? So here, by covering her eyes, I'm reducing the visual information in this image. I'm making it more non-specific. I'm making it less about a portrait of a girl and more about shape, line, and form. So I start to really like this look, and I'm just trying to add some variation so I have more images to work with post-production. So I'm having her kind of bring her hand, softening up the shape of the arms. And now I'm just adding a bit more curve to the image, so kind of getting some contrast to the very sharp perpendicular lines that we're getting with the black and white. So now we're going super non-specific, and I'm just focusing on limbs and hair here. We have the paper kind of hooked around the corner, and I'm just having her drape her body over. So we just get limbs and hair, kind of some detail shots for the series. So now we're moving location, and we're going to go into this room where we have the white paper set up kind of actually as a backdrop. We're hooking it into the closet in this room. We found a stool in there. So now I'm just having her kind of pose as if it were a formal backdrop, but we're still keeping the detail of this space by, shooting wide enough so you can see around and just see kind of the dirtiness, the imperfection of the location. So now we're getting into some up-close portraits. And again, I want less visual information. So I'm having her cover her mouth with her hair. My approach to this is I don't really have a specific emotion along with this narrative. So I'm covering the mouth to kind of make it non-specific and just having her close the eyes. It makes it look like she's kind of wrapped and knotted up in her own little world, which is kind of the aesthetic I'm going for with this dollhouse, and she's just kind of here in this space. So I'm just asking her to kind of play with her hair. We're getting some grainy details of her hair, and I really like specifically her hair. It's super long and dark, so it goes really nicely over the white backdrop. So again, we're using, the skin tone and length of her legs to break up the dark black boots and the dark black dress. And we're just kind of playing around with some cute little inward angles, which I think really gives us a nice childish aesthetic. So here I have the brilliant idea to have her wrap herself in the paper like a dress, and here's the moment I realized that that is a terrible idea. It ended up looking like a frumpy prom dress. So I just decided to focus on her upper body and use her arm to reflect the angle of this really short roof. Biggest life lesson in photography that I've learned: if an idea is not working, just trash it, dump it, move on, because your model or subject will appreciate your honesty instead of forcing them to try and make this weird idea work. It'll be easier to just move on. So now we're stepping outside and we're gonna add some motion of her hair along with the line of the roof and the blue of the sky. And here I found a piece of trash, an old probably shopping bag, and I'm wrapping it around the lens to add a little bit of lens obstruction and to blur out the edges of the image. And it gives us this really soft, ethereal, blurry look, which I love. It's also taking away some background information. So now we're changing locations into this big open warehouse, and I'm having her wear the mustardy green dress to kind of reflect the warmer tones we get from the metal on this warehouse. The instruction I'm giving her here is to just kind of have a dizzy, stumbly walk, which really loosens her up and gets some flow and swing into her limbs and gives us some interesting poses. So now we're inside this old way station, and we have this bright orange chair, and I'm just finding ways that we can use the light coming in from the skylight while also using this chair to kind of break up this space. So now we're moving into this room, and we have a strong light coming from the side, so I'm having her face that window and kind of lean back. And I'm also using my camera settings to limit the amount of light I'm getting so we get more of this silhouetted look. And now we're using that side light to kind of highlight the profile of her face while also using that window in the background to break up the background and give us a bit more of some structure and composition. And now we're doing the same thing from the back, getting more of a silhouette on her face from that side light. And this last image, I'm just having her kind of drape herself over, using that side light to kind of shed light across the length of her face and upper body. So I'm going to talk about a few key editing concepts that came up in putting this whole collection together. The first one is using my crop and rotation tool. A lot of my composition comes from post-production, moving things around, cropping in, and rotating. So to do this, I try to find something in the image that will establish a good vertical or horizontal line. So here when I open the crop tool, I'm using this corner of the wall to establish a vertical line, and I'm trying to get that grid to line up with that vertical line. And I think that cropping just looks a lot better, a lot more intentional. But occasionally, depending on the angle that you're shooting at or what your lens is like, sometimes just cropping and rotating to look for those vertical and horizontal lines won't be possible because there'll be too much lens distortion. So if you look at this image, when I flip to the original, there's a big bow across the bottom where that lens just distorts the line, and we don't look so perfectly perpendicular in those lines. And so I can accomplish a better composition by first cropping and rotating just to kind of get a good starting point. And then I can also focus on the distortion of the lens. So if I come down into the lens corrections and I use the manual distortion, I can move that slider to bow out or bow in to compensate for however the lens is distorting my image to get it more straight. And this is how I was able to get the look I wanted, where it looks like we were down at eye level in the space along with her. So this next tip I'm going to talk about is one that is super common, but didn't come up a lot in this session because we weren't shooting outside very much. So super blown out and overexposed skies are really common. You can see that my original shot was way blown out. There's no detail in the sky. So by shooting in RAW and then also editing in Lightroom, I can bring back some of those details, and I'll show you how I approach that. So my top tip is to use the dehaze slider rather than using the contrast slider for this. And I'll show you why. So the dehaze slider pulls in and pulls out details in a much stronger way, I think, than the contrast slider does. So when I pull the contrast slider, it's really just working with what we already have established in the image, but the dehaze slider adds so much more depth to that sky, and so I like using the dehaze slider first. And the next thing I can do is identify that, okay, the sky is blue, and so maybe I can focus on the blue by asking Lightroom to make all of the blues a bit more intense. So I'm going to the luminance in the HSL section and just pulling that blue slider down so that all of the blue in the image is going to be that much more intense, and that'll really pop out of the sky against the white of the clouds. So I'll go a bit more in depth on some general retouching and editing with this image here. So I'm starting off by using spot removal just to take away, that bruise on her arm, just kind of cleaning up any stray hairs or blemishes on the face, just to give us a good starting point. I always super zoom in when I'm doing spot removal, that way I'm not patching large sections of her skin, but just focusing on like the tiny pixels that I want to correct. So for this image, I am using a color profile. I'm using the Kodak Gold profile, and that is just a preset I have that's going to establish some warm tones, some bluish cyan highlights, and some desaturated reds, which I think looks really good specifically on medium skin tones with some olive and peachy undertones. So now what I'm doing to further change the color of this image is I'm going down into the calibration, and I'm adjusting the blue primary, so the blue colors of the shadows in the image. I am adding a bit more saturation. So I think that adding saturation to your blue primary just adds more life into your skin tones, especially for images that are a little bit desaturated or faded. Well, thank you so much for watching, and a big thank you to Laramie Public Arts Coalition for making this resource possible and for their efforts to engage and connect the community through art. My name is Sydney, and feel free to contact me with any questions or thoughts. I hope we're all able to learn from each other and stay motivated during this time. See ya!